We have two activities lined up for today's event. The first is a QUESCREN Lunch and Learn from noon until 1 p.m. and it features a presentation by Dr. Richard Bourhis called Willingness of Quebec-born Anglophone and Francophone undergraduate students to stay in the province or leave, with commentary provided by Dr. Chedly Belkhodja, then a question and answer period. The second activity at 1 p.m., so please stay on if you can, is a very brief launch of a new book edited by two colleagues and myself called La Charte, la Loi 101 et des Québécois d'expression anglaise, the Charter, Bill 101 in English-speaking Quebec. And that will be in the company of a number of the authors of this book, who include Richard Bourhis.
So thank you for inviting me to give this lunch and learn talk on a study we conducted with Quebec-born Anglophone students at McGill and Quebec-born Francophones at l'Université du Québec à Montréal, who are willing to either stay or leave in Quebec. I conducted this study with my graduate student, Rana Sioufi, who completed her PhD in the psychology department at l'Université du Québec à Montréal. PowerPoint is available for you on the QUESCREN Community Knowledge Library. I am presenting the first 24 slides of our PowerPoint to keep within the 20-minute limit on my presentation. At your leisure, do not hesitate to consult other features of the study in slides 25 to 36 of the PowerPoint. I'm giving the talk in English, but will answer, of course, in French and English. Any questions? So we start with a little bit of demolinguistic background, if you don't mind. This is a figure, and on the top line, there's a blue line, and that represents the proportion of Quebec Francophones in the province of Quebec who have French as a mother tongue. And as you can see, in 1971, before the adoption of Bill 101, there was 80.7% of the Quebec population that was French speaking as a mother tongue. And by the census of 2016, there was a drop to 77.1%. But we also have to look not just at the proportion, but also at the absolute numbers. So for the Francophone people in Quebec in 1971, there was 4.8 million Quebec Francophone mother tongue speakers. And by 2016, there was 6.2 million. So we have a slight drop in the proportion, but a steady increase in the absolute numbers. The next slide, the next group that we look at are allophones, Quebec allophones, and that's the black line on the figure. And back in 71, there was 6.3% of the Quebec population that were allophones. Allophones are those who have neither French nor English as a mother tongue. They could be Arabic, they could be Mandarin speakers, Spanish speakers. By 2016 census, there was 13.2% of the Quebec population that were allophones. Now, in terms of absolute numbers, back in 1971, there was 390,000 allophones. And by 2016, there was over 1 million allophones. And that reflected the Quebec policy, immigration policy, of accepting more immigrants in order to offset the decline, the birth decline of Francophones and Anglophones in the province. And then the group that is of more interest to us today are the Quebec Anglophones, those who have English as a mother tongue. And as you can see, in 1971, 13% of the Quebec population was made up of Quebec Anglophones. And by 2016, there was only 7.5% of the Quebec population made up of Anglophones. And then we look at the absolute numbers of Anglophones. You find that in 1971, there was 788,000 Anglophones in Quebec. But by 2016, there was only 601,000 left. So for the Anglophone population, you have a decline in both the proportion and the absolute numbers. On the next slide, we have what we call net interprovincial migration of Anglophones and Francophones. So here we look at the number of Anglophones in red who left the province, minus those who arrived from the rest of Canada to settle in Quebec. And for each census from 1966 to 2016, there was a net outflow of Anglophones from the province of Quebec. And in the period between 1966 and 1986 is what we call the exodus. Those are the bar graphs in red that are the highest, as you can see on the image here on the figure. And the highest one, as you can see, is in the census of 1976, there was 106,000 Anglophones who left the province. And that coincided, by the way, with the adoption of, with the election of the Parti Québécois in 1976, the adoption of Bill 101 in 1977, and the first referendum on Quebec separation. Now, all told, that's the histograms in red show a net outflow of 349,000 Anglophones from the province of Quebec to the rest of Canada. In yellow, you find the number of allophones who also left the province compared to those who arrived. And that's also a net outflow across the period from 1966 to 2016. Allophones, we lost 120,000 allophones during that period, which is a loss of human capital and also linguistic diversity for the province of Quebec. And in blue, you can see also a steady net outflow of Quebec Francophones to the rest of Quebec, but much less so, for a total loss of 57,000. So what we're doing today, we're looking at the data after the 2016 census. And of course, we're going to get the results of the 2021 census very soon. And the study that we're conducting now in the next slide will be on that, you could say, the grandchildren of Bill 101. So we have push and pull factors that account for wanting to leave or stay in Quebec. So pull factors are those which attract Anglophones or Francophones to migrate from Quebec to the rest of Canada. So let's say we look at Anglophones. Well, economic factors could be Anglophones seek better jobs and higher salaries and better career prospects in the rest of Canada. Achievement goals could be pursuing further studies or training in the rest of Canada, perhaps not available in Quebec. And you have your classic affective factors of joining one's family or a spouse in the rest of Canada. We also have push factors, which are aversive circumstances which incite Anglophones and Francophones to move out of Quebec for the rest of Canada. So again, we're going to look at, as an example, with the Anglophones, which is of interest. So economic factors could be the lack of employment prospects and career opportunities in Quebec for Anglophones or Francophones, as it could happen. Intergroup tensions, political uncertainty, and feeling ill at ease, stigmatized or discriminated in Quebec. And three, well, low or reduced access to services in English for CEGEPs, health and social services, municipal and provincial services in Quebec for Quebec Anglophones. So let's look now at the study that we actually conducted. So you're really now looking at this case where you have a Quebec-born Anglophone or Francophone who might want to leave Quebec to either get a better job and a better career, to join partners and family, or to avoid linguistic tensions. And these Quebec Anglophones or Francophones could move to an English province of Canada. They could move to a French region of Canada, such as Acadia, or to the United States. So we were, in the next slide, we had 234 Quebec-born Francophones. They were undergraduate students at l'Université du Québec à Montréal, where I teach. They were mother tongue French, born and raised in Quebec. Their parents have French as a mother tongue, and they're also born in Quebec. Then we went to McGill, next door, 800 meters from UQAM, to McGill University, where we have 205 Quebec-born Anglophones. They have English as a mother tongue. They're born and raised in Quebec, and the parents have English as a mother tongue, and they're born in Quebec or in the rest of Canada. Next. So all these undergraduate students completed 12 scales, 12 opinion scales that are well established psychometrically. And they answered each question in this survey using a Likert scale made up of 7 points, which 1 is not at all agree with the opinion statement, 2 a little bit, 4 moderately or neutral, 6 very much, or 7 totally. And we use multivariate statistics to analyze this data, but I won't describe the statistics except to say that we have means, and we also will be doing regressions, multiple regressions. So the next slide. So now we're going to give you a little picture of the two groups, the Anglophones and Francophones of our study. So for the Quebec-born Anglophones at McGill, we asked them about their self-rated skills in English and French. And as you can see in red, the Quebec Anglophones rate themselves as totally fluent in English. And as you can see at 5.8, also quite good in French. So these are quite bilingual McGill students. Of course, they're Quebec-born. Then we asked them about how much they use French and English in their everyday life with friends, work in university and home. And as you can see, they use mostly English in their everyday life, 6 on the 7-point scale, and half as much French, 3.6. Now we look at my students at l'UQAM, and they also report very strong skill in their French mother tongue, 7, and also report strong skills in English at 5.1. For language use, we find that on their everyday life, they use French most of the time, 6.8, and very little English at 2.2, given that Montreal is still majority French and the province is majority French. The next slide. Then we look at their identity profile. So let's look at identity profiles of Quebec Anglophones. And as you can see, Quebec Anglophones have what we call multiple identities. They identify strongly as Canadians, pretty strongly as bilingual, English Quebecers and Montrealers, and not so much as Québécois, as you can see in blue line. For Quebec Francophones, the identity is more unified. They identify totally as Francophone and totally as Québécois, and only moderately as Canadian, bilingual, or Montrealer. So as you can see from these two types of results, we have two different types of undergraduate students with the French and the English that differ on these dimensions. Next slide. Now, we're asking them about whether they want to stay in Quebec or leave. So what we find is that for Quebec Francophones, they want to stay in Quebec. Why leave Quebec, where you are in a majority French, to a province in the rest of Canada where you inevitably will be a minority? Also, so they show that in blue, you can see that Quebec, our Francophones don't really want to go very much to English regions of Canada or even French regions of Canada, and neither to the United States. Quebec Anglophones are more complicated because on the right there, you can see that they want to stay in Quebec and they're willing to live in Quebec, 5.2, 4.8, etc. But on the left, they also want to leave for the rest of Canada at 5.1 and a little bit less to the French regions of Canada and not very much to the United States. So now we're going to look at background information to tell us more about why they want to stay or leave. So Francophone students rate that they have very positive economic and career prospects in Quebec at 5.3 on average, whereas Anglophones are neutral on their economic prospects in Quebec at 4.1. And on the following items, to give an example, in the years to come, I think that I have good chances of finding a job in Quebec that corresponds to my area of training. Quebec Francophones are very optimistic on that. They are on 5.7. Quebec Anglophones are neutral at only 4. Another item, all things considered, I think that I have good chances of building a good career in my area of training by staying in Quebec. Quebec Francophones are enthusiastic, 5.9 on that. Quebec Anglophones, neutral, not so optimistic. Next slide. Then we asked them how much they want to mobilize to improve the vitality of their own language group and to the other language group. So for Quebec Anglophones, what you can see on the left is that Quebec Anglophone students really want to mobilize personally to improve their own vitality as an English community in the province at 5.7, but less so for the French majority. And then you have the mirror image of that result with the Francophone students on the right. In blue, Francophone students want to mobilize personally to improve the vitality of the French majority in Quebec, and much less so for the Anglophone minority in Quebec. Next slide. Then we asked them about their collective, their feeling of that their own group and the other group is a victim of collective discrimination in Quebec. It's a topical issue these days, I think. We have these elections, I don't know. So we have, what we find here is that both Quebec Francophones and Anglophones agree that at 2.3 and 2.2, they agree that Quebec Francophones are not the victim collectively of discrimination. Both groups agree with that. Francophones even admit that Quebec Anglophones and Anglophones coming from the rest of Canada settling in Quebec, 2.8 and 3.1, do suffer from some collective discrimination. That's in blue. And Quebec Quebec Anglophones at McGill, well, they think that both the Quebec Anglophones and Anglo-Canadians that have settled in Quebec are much more victim of discrimination. We asked Anglophones to complete what we call the acculturation scale. And it's their acculturation orientations towards the Quebec Francophone majority in the province. So we find that Anglophone undergraduates at McGill endorse what we call integrationism, 4.4. And that means that Anglophones are saying, I wish to maintain my cultural heritage as a Quebec Anglophone and also adopt key features of Québécois French culture. So that's a classic case of integration. But Quebec Anglophones were also at 5.1 endorsing separatism. I wish to maintain my cultural heritage as a Québécois, as a Quebec Anglophone, rather than adopt Québécois French culture. So they have these two contradictory acculturation orientations and they're endorsing them. Next. Now we're going to look at predictors of desire to stay or leave Quebec. Though Quebec-born Francophones had little desire to leave Quebec, what factors predicted their desire to leave for the rest of Canada? Also, Quebec-born Anglophones have a dilemma. Quebec-born Anglophones would like to stay and live in Quebec, which is their birthplace, their homeland, where it's their mother country, you could say, the province of Quebec. But Anglophones also wish to leave Quebec for the rest of Canada. So what factors predicted Anglo desire to stay in Quebec? What factors predicted Anglo desires to leave for the rest of Canada? So the next slide. So now we're going to look at Quebec Francophones who want to leave Quebec for the rest of Canada. And the images I have there, the circles, the size of the circle is the weight of these variables in accounting for willing to leave for the rest of Canada from Quebec. So the most important factor for Quebec Francophones to venture out in an English province of Quebec is to improve my economic and career prospects as an individual. So it's that's like a pull factor. Also, these Quebec Francophones have frequently use English in their everyday language. They identify somewhat as Anglophones, and they're less mobilized to improve the vitality of the French majority in Quebec. So you could say that these are sort of bilingual, perhaps bicultural Québécois Francophones who are not afraid to go and settle in some of the other provinces of Canada. Okay, next. Now we look at Quebec Anglophones who want to stay in Quebec in blue, and then we'll look at those who want to leave in red. So for Quebec Anglophones who want to stay in Quebec, the most important variables that predict that orientation is the optimism for their own finance and career prospects in Quebec. Okay, so that's more of an individualistic factor. Then another factor is not concerned about linguistic tensions in Quebec. So they don't listen to all the noise about French-English tensions in the province. Also, those who want to stay in Quebec, they wish to stay with their family and their partners that live in Quebec. They also endorse the integration acculturation orientation. And they don't endorse individualism so much. So taken together, you can see here a pattern where these Quebec Anglophones feel comfortable in the Quebec setting, as long as they don't bother too much about listening to linguistic tensions, and they have good prospects for career in the province. Now let's look at Anglophones who want to leave Quebec. So the main reason why they want to leave Quebec is what we call zero-sum beliefs. Zero-sum beliefs are like, if the Francophones win, the Anglophones lose. And here are some items that correspond to that. So Anglophones who want to leave and endorse zero-sum belief would agree with the item, it's difficult for the English language to thrive when the French language expands further in Quebec. Or Anglophones living here lose out when Francophones make political and economic gains in Quebec. So that's one of the major reasons. They also want to avoid linguistic tensions between Francophones and Anglophones, and they would agree with the following items: to avoid being judged because I am an English-speaking Quebecer, to stop being a linguistic minority situation, to get better access to healthcare in English. So these are the two major reasons why they want to leave: zero-sum beliefs and to avoid linguistic tensions. But they also want to improve their economic and career prospects by leaving Quebec for the rest of Canada. Also, they're more likely to believe that the Anglophone community is a victim of collective discrimination, and they're more likely to endorse the separation acculturation orientation. So those are the profile. This is the profile of those who want to leave. The next slide, and I'm going to finish with this slide as with the summary. Anglophones endorse multiple identities as Canadian, bilinguals, English Quebecers, and Montrealers. They rate themselves as being good speakers in French, and they use it moderately, so they're quite bilingual. They're motivated to improve the vitality of their minority Anglophone community. These Anglophones are pessimistic about their financial and career prospects in Quebec. They feel that Anglophones are collectively victim of discrimination in Quebec. They feel that when they're personally victim of discrimination, it's mainly because of their English language, which we call being the victim of linguicism. Anglophones who wish to stay and live in Quebec are not concerned with French-English tensions, are optimistic about their career prospect situations. They wish to stay with family and partners who live in Quebec, endorse integration. Finally, when we look at Anglophones who wish to leave Quebec, they want to avoid French-English tensions. They endorse zero-sum beliefs. They see Anglophones as victims of collective discrimination, and they endorse the separation acculturation orientation, and they wish to improve their personal and career prospects in Canada rather than Quebec. So merci beaucoup, thank you. And now we have our discussant.
Thank you very much, Richard. Richard Bourhis obtained his PhD in social psychology at University of Bristol. He's professor emeritus in psychology at Université de Québec à Montréal. And he has so many honors, it would take 5 minutes to list them, but let it suffice to say he's published over 100 articles and books. He has a doctorate honoris causa from University of Lorraine. He's fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, and he received the Gold Medal Award of the Canadian Psychological Association for his lifetime contributions. Next up is Chedly Belkhodja. Chedly is professor at the School of Community and Public Affairs at Concordia University and a co-director of QUESCREN. He completed his PhD in political science at Université de Montesquieu in Bordeaux. And Chedly's research focuses on immigration policies and mobility of migrants. He's also interested in the processes of integration and inclusion. So Chedly has the honor of making some comments on Richard Bourhis' presentation. Chedly?
Merci. Merci, Lorraine. Thank you. It's my, I have the task to offer a few comments on actually more the chapter, the book chapter than the, I mean, in the volume on Bill 101, Richard Bourhis and Rana Sioufi are presenting the study that Richard just presented, but there's also a broader picture of the linguistic situation in Quebec. I'm not an expert in social psychology. I'm more of a qualitative researcher, less quanti. But really, I enjoyed reading the chapter, and the big question really that pops up very rapidly in the book is, should I stay or should I go? So interprovincial mobility is of youth is a common pattern in Canada. People moving out to Western Canada from many provinces, or young Francophones coming to Montreal to launch their artistic career. I know a lot of them who left New Brunswick, my home province, for this. So the big question is, should I stay or should I go? The other one, or the one that's linked to that, is really moving for what reason? So is it for better work opportunities? Is it because there is a feeling of being in a disadvantaged position, of being discriminated, of being actually stuck? And I like that expression of being stuck, of being in a situation where you feel maybe that your opportunities are not there if you stay in that, if you stay in a place. So you have to, you feel that you need to move. Something that you see also in many studies on second generation immigrants, that feeling of stuckness of people that will make the decision to go somewhere else. And the other, there's many questions in your chapter. The other one would be, what does it mean to be part of Quebec today? What does it mean to be part of a province that has, and the chapter presents this very well, the evolution of the linguistic landscape of Quebec since the Quiet Revolution, and the future of young Francophone and Anglophone in the province of Quebec. And the key concept in the book, and you alluded to it in the presentation also, is the concept of linguistic vitality. And what is really interesting about the case of Quebec, if I compare to New Brunswick again, is that in Quebec you're faced really, and I say it in French here, in une sorte de face-à-face insoutenable dans le contexte québécois quand on pense à la vitalité. So because you have actually two linguistic community referring to the concept of vitality as an essential concept for their preservation, for their vitality. So when I think of Bill 96, Bill 96 puts vitality in the forefront for with this notion of renforcer la place du français au Québec, faire du français la langue commune. So vitality is a key element. And of course, Anglophones in Quebec, or the English community in Quebec, is also referring to vitality as an essential piece of its belonging to Quebec. So vitality is key in its language, its institutions, like you say, and it's also status. So the chapter presents this very well, looking at the evolution of linguistic, of vitality in Quebec, looking at it at both communities. And you also in the chapter, you bring this to what really is happening now. So what has changed since 95, what has changed in the relation between the majority and the minority, in the relation between these two communities in Quebec, with all the changes that we saw, and from the 90s, maybe from the second referendum, there's been a lot of changes in Quebec, and we are now in a situation where we see maybe this relation again now. So the whole research that you're doing with your student is really to come to this study, like and the study itself analyzing the decision of staying or leaving Quebec for young students, Anglophone, Francophone, you said undergraduate students in these two institutions. I'm not, like I said, maybe I'm not commenting a lot on the study, but around the study. But I find the study very interesting. The results for me are not surprising. So work is a big reason for leaving, for moving, but feeling of linguistic insecurity can be also another factor. What really is troubling, maybe when we think of this also, is that sense of, I would say, of non-communication between the two groups. That when you read the study, when you read the section on the discussion, what came up to me was a sense of polarization, but also of non-communication. And one graph shows that pretty well when you say it's the same in both communities, that sense of non-communication or no bridges between the communities. Is this also due to the specific population of the study, young undergraduate students? This can be maybe something that it would be interesting to explore. Could it be different in another university? I find McGill, Université de Montréal, very homogeneous in a way. Now, you would say there's also diversity, but I'm thinking maybe in other universities such as Concordia, where a lot of Francophone students also are at Concordia. Is there something different, referring to different student population, international students, graduate students? Would be interesting to see their willingness to, I mean, facing the same challenges. Are they reacting in the same way? There was recently just a piece of our Graham Carr, the president of Concordia, just referred to these questions, I think yesterday in La Presse Plus, how to retain or how to make sure that highly skilled students who are in Montreal stay in Montreal. And he had maybe an optimistic position in saying, if we offer opportunities, if we build the capacity of a city such as Montreal, but this was maybe more aimed at graduate students also, so different from what you did in your case study. But what next? I think I'll conclude with this. The research, like I said, many questions. It made me think of how to avoid maybe this growing polarization between the two linguistic communities, how to create dialogue, how to create bridges. Maybe I'm a bit naive here or optimistic, idealistic, but sadly we're not going in that direction. I find both groups or both camps are in a more confrontation mode, I would say. And this is a bit troubling with what we're living in recent months, or even your conclusion in the book presents all these events that have been going in Quebec. Many little, linguistic tensions, mostly Montreal, Bonjour High, the media coverage from certain newspapers, Francophone newspapers in Montreal, but also, this polarization of the communities that really is not maybe something that takes us away from maybe looking at this from a different perspective, with that would bring us to look at the diversity within the communities, to look at languages in a pluralistic context in everyday lives. I think when you talk to young Montrealers, also language can be something that you cut across. So I think this is really the final point would be and how to expand vitality and not reduce it to a political and strategic relation between the community. So I think vitality needs to be something that is fluid in a way also, and that would maybe change the debate that we're seeing now.
Thank you, Chedly. Before Richard enters into perhaps a response and some response to some of the questions, which I'll read out for you, Richard, William Floch, who is secrétaire adjoint of the Secretariat aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise, is here to make a few remarks. The Secretariat has been a supporter of QUESCREN for several years, and we're happy to have William here.
Sure, I can jump in. Thanks for this opportunity, and thank you, Dr. Bourhis and Dr. Belkhodja for a very interesting contribution to our reflections about what is clearly one of the key vitality challenges for English-speaking Quebecers. Maybe I'll just make a couple of quick observations because, of course, in my former role as a research manager, these kinds of presentations and work are endlessly fascinating. But I would say that in some of the previous data that I'm familiar with, either census data or different public opinion research that was conducted in an earlier phase, about 10, 15 years ago, really suggested that for English speakers who were considering their future in Quebec and the motivations that might cause them to leave, there seemed to be something of a generational analysis that could be applied. So in other words, people under 30, it was often in search of opportunities, in search of educational or economic opportunities. They were starting a career, finishing schooling and so on. So that seemed to be a piece. For older people, 60 and over, it seemed to be often family reasons. They were sometimes returning to their province of origin or following children who had left. So in the retirement years, there would be that family relationship kind of motivation. And in the middle generation, those 30 to 60, there was a lot more of the kind of the political uncertainty and those kind of factors of how they fit in. So I'm interested to see that you focus clearly on the younger generation here, and it certainly echoes some of what we would have seen in previous work. And just for Chedly's point, the sample of the other public and research that I'm referring to would have been across Quebec, so a very strong regional sample. And I think that a lot of what we see is consistent with what Dr. Bourhis's work has shown here. Of course, this goes much more into detail, both in terms of the kinds of questions that were asked and a more, I guess, nuanced understanding of the motivation, and also, with the statistical analysis, probably a little bit more sophisticated than some of the data I've seen in the past. So I think it's a really useful, up-to-date contribution. It helps us understand. I'll just mention that in terms of, say, with our own Secretariat and the kind of projects we're supporting, and one of the reasons we're very pleased to partner with QUESCREN, as we've done on a number of fronts, is that building this kind of knowledge helps deepen understanding, helps us then design strategies, priorities that can, essentially make the biggest contribution possible. I would say that on this whole notion of economic opportunity and the feeling that you can establish good prospects to have a good career in Quebec, that's a really central pillar in the work of the Secretariat, since we've been around for 3.5, 4 years now. Because we recognize that was not only a long-standing preoccupation for English speakers and a factor in retention or departures, but also it aligned. We could get away from the zero-sum game because with the panier de main-d'oeuvre and all of the challenges that Quebec faces in terms of keeping, obviously the pandemic has thrown us all for a loop, but prior to the pandemic, Quebec's economy was really vibrating, and very exciting. And what could hold us back in Quebec would be the lack of personnel, of human resources. And I would say that it's resonated, that kind of message within government when we work with other departments. the notion that we can help identify a potential clientele that isn't receiving a lot of attention and that we're potentially losing to other provinces. I can say that that is something that we've had no problem convincing various other departments, including the Minister of Finance and Emploi Quebec and others, to work with us to develop strategies. And in that regard, I would say that also we're very fortunate to have a number of community partners and institutional partners who are very, very motivated to work on these kinds of issues. So I think of, for example, Youth Employment Services, the Provincial Employment Roundtable, the Consortium of Post-Secondary Institutions, and the Regional Development Network, as well as many other institutions and organizations. And I think that there's a lot of collaboration and a lot of potential for the government of Quebec to work with those institutions to at least tackle, without any apologies and with a reasonable feeling that we're going to make progress, but to tackle some of those employability challenges. There's other work that's been undertaken by John Abbott. I think Doug Brown's on the call here today, that also looks at intentions of CEGEP students to stay or leave. And all of these things, trying to understand it better so we can then develop the best possible responses. We're obviously very keen to learn from these research studies and to try to apply the lessons learned. So I'll stop there, Lorraine, but I would again thank QUESCREN for organizing this event, for focusing on what is a really important issue. And to Dr. Bourhis and his team, thank you for this enlightening research.
Thank you very much, William. I now have the pleasure of going into some questions for Richard. You're now in the hot seat, Richard. There are a bunch of questions for you. First of all, Madame Hélène, who identified herself earlier as a school teacher, wrote, Je suis surprise de ne pas avoir vu votre nom apparaître à la liste des experts appelés à commenter le projet de loi 96. Pourriez-vous fournir davantage d'explications sur le processus de sélection des experts et si vous y aviez été invité, qu'auriez-vous contribué? Merci. So in English, her question is simply put, why are you not on the speakers list for the upcoming hearings on Bill 96 that the Quebec government will be starting next week?
Okay. For the first part of the question, the choice of the people who will present at the commission parlementaire pour le projet de loi 96 is totally dictated by the ruling government. So it happens to be the CAQ. So they're the ones who made the choices, nobody else. If I had been invited, then I would have discussed a little bit like what Bill is saying. So in my study, for example, having good career and financial prospects in Quebec is both a reason for why Quebec-born Anglophones want to stay in Quebec, and for some others why they want to leave. And it's in our multiple regression, they're amongst the most important factors. And they're the factors that you can do something about. As Bill Floch was saying, there's something that can be done about that. What can people do about linguistic tensions? Well, it's beyond the realms of what they can say. It's just happening that there are rivalries between Francophones and Anglophones in Quebec and Allophones, and individuals can't do very much about it. So obviously, finding ways of, for example, getting more Anglophones to be hired in the Quebec public administration of 600,000 public servants would be a good step. And even though Anglophones do apply, they don't often get called for those jobs, and so on, and including also, of course, allophones and visible minorities and First Nations. So there's so much work still to be done, even within the Quebec government infrastructure, to hire people from all the different communities of Quebec, not just Francophone historical members. So already there's a lot of work to be done on that front, let alone all the rest. So we can't do much about intergroup rivalries and tensions, but governments and individuals and associations like YES and others that we know about can do everyday work to try to place immigrants, allophones, First Nations, Anglophones in jobs that they would not otherwise get if it was not for those NGOs trying to push that. So I think there's a lot of work just to get people to get a job and some success for survival, economic survival in Quebec. And so many leave because that does not happen to them, even after staying here for decades or even knowing French very well.
Thank you, Richard. There are a number of questions. So Chedly raised the point, and then Doug Brown and Linda Show had added to it about your sample group. And the question, the gist of these questions is, McGill is one particular demographic. As Doug writes, it would be skewed in terms of socioeconomic class and mobility, regional representation, and their academic and social mobility. So he and others have asked, what about CEGEP students, students of other colleges or universities, and also people with who are not in school and have lower skill sets, who, as you know, Richard, are highly represented among the growing poor of the English-speaking communities.
Okay. So because it's a social psychological study and things like that, we have to control for the socioeconomic status of the respondents, their cultural background, etc. So that's why we chose university students that, you know, are very similar across universities in Quebec. So that assumes there's already a lot of advantages and abilities, and so they are comparable in terms of socioeconomic status. So I agree that we should sample other types of groups that are more vulnerable. In a way, we chose McGill and UQAM undergraduate students because these are the people who have a lot of human capital. They're the ones who can move around by staying in Quebec or going elsewhere in Canada or the US. And so they're the top of the heap. And if the top of the heap has those problems that I've shown in this study, aggravating factors accumulate for all the other ones who don't have that socioeconomic status, that don't have that cultural capital at home to persist and go on to the university setting or to the CEGEP setting. So all the other ones suffer aggravating conditions that keeps them even more vulnerable. And that's why what we find is that, including some of the work by Bill Floch and Joanne Pocock, those who leave Quebec end up with better jobs outside of Quebec. And it's usually the cream of the crop that leave because they have to compete for jobs in Ontario and Alberta to actually get the job as Quebec-based applicants for these jobs to then move to those provinces. And so that accounts for the fact that those who have remained in Quebec who are Anglophones and Allophones very often, they're more poor, they have less prospects, economic prospects, and they're more vulnerable on every possible front. And that voice for those minorities in Quebec has to be heard by the Francophone majority, which are now a dominant majority, no matter how you look at it. You know, the Québécois Francophone have enfranchised themselves through these 50 years of development, which were needed and which is what we needed. But now, as you could say, no longer, I don't think Quebec Francophones are a fragile majority anymore. I think that they're a dominant majority. And if you're a dominant majority, you got to take care of people who are vulnerable. And that could be any other outgroup by ethnicity or language. And that's where the big challenge is for the Quebec society, is to how do you take care of not just Quebec Anglophones, but also the Allophones that are having problems and the First Nations. So that's what a responsible dominant group will do with its minorities. And though that's one of the biggest challenge of Quebec society today.
Thank you, Richard. A very specific question from Michel Thibault of CEDEC. Hi, Michel. Are we able to know the age of the survey participants, since of course students come in all age groups?
Oh, they're between 19 and 30, and the average is about 23, because they're classic undergraduate students. So that's another reason why we selected undergraduate students because of age, social class, cultural capital, and all those factors.
I don't see other questions in the chat. Perhaps I've missed some. If somebody has any, please make them. But Richard, I'm sorry, I'm trying to fend off my cat here. Richard, do you have anything to say in response to Chedly's comments, which were quite global in their orientation?
Yes, well, the points are well taken. The challenge is, I mean, I think Chedly does bring out also these challenges that we have to go beyond. Maybe the Vitality framework was developed by me and my colleagues back in the 70s in England, where I was doing my PhD, and we were looking at the Welsh and the Scot and the various linguistic communities other than the Anglophones in Great Britain. So, of course, and it was also developed in the language policy and language planning literature to sort of say, well, okay, what happens with these minorities who need institutional support? And I was inspired by Joshua Fishman in different areas in that sense. So I think that what Chedly is referring to is, and it's a very critical issue, is yes, universities and CEGEPs are areas where people of different backgrounds, cultural, even socioeconomic, ethnic background, and the university can be a place where you have intercultural twinnings type of thing, where people can interact. Now, for example, my sample at McGill, actually, in order to get those 215 Quebec-born Anglophones, we had to run almost 500 students at McGill, because all the other ones came from, there were Quebec Francophones in those classrooms. There was allophones, so first, second, and third generation Québécois that have a language other than French or English, and also we had students that were from out of province, so from Alberta and Ontario. So we have about 250 to 300 others that we could not classify as Quebec-born Anglophones, but they were so disparate in background that we could not lump them all together as some other group, which I thought was unfair. So that's why I wasn't able to do that, and add a third group in my study, because it would not have been fair for the diversity that existed. But the point is this: CEGEPs where you can have Francophones and Anglophones attending, universities where you can have Francophones, Anglophones, Allophones, and international students to mix. Those are the settings in which you can break down prejudices and stereotypes about outgroups, about groups that you were trained to believe that they were threatening to you linguistically or culturally, or religiously because they wear a veil. So that sort of setting is the place where those enduring enculturated prejudices and stereotypes that you receive at home, in primary school, in secondary school, and sometimes in CEGEP, that's the setting where you can start breaking it down by making friendship networks with people that are different from you, culturally, socioeconomically, and religiously. So the idea of the university, universel is the idea, we meet from all different backgrounds from all over the world, and we share common knowledge, and we develop a critical mind about all of these issues. So what we need is to have more contact between Francophones and Anglophones inside our CEGEPs, both French CEGEP and English CEGEP. We don't need a cap on the number of places that are available for English CEGEPs in 5 years from now, so that English CEGEPs will only account for 8.3% of the places in CEGEPs in Quebec, because there's about 8% of Anglophones in Quebec. This is a numerus clausus clause that you find in Europe in the 1930s about allowing Jews to come in or not in universities, commensurate with their proportion in the population. So, so the idea of capping and limiting the amount of contact that can exist in CEGEP and in university is exactly what you don't want to do, to create and to break down prejudices and stereotypes between people. That's where friendship networks begin, and they can grow outside of the university and the CEGEP, and these friendships can lead to common businesses. Like two kids from a CEGEP or university would say, let's start a business, a Francophone and Anglophone and Anglophone. Say, we had a great idea that we developed at the university level. Let's try to build it up as a PME, you know, as a small business. That's where a lot of these contacts are made.